Whoops, looks like dinner is served. A true fashion statement. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Wow, dinner just attacked her.
You should apologize.
For pasta, it's just dinner.
To the men in that room, Amara wasn't a guest. She was just another person they assumed didn't belong.
The plate hit the floor first. Then the red sauce followed. And a second later, the entire ballroom burst into laughter. Warm pasta slid slowly down the front of my dress as the room of billionaires stared at me like I was part of the evening's entertainment. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then a man at the table leaned back in his chair and laughed. "Wow," he said loudly. "Looks like someone spilled dinner on the help." More laughter. I stood frozen in the center of the ballroom at the Grand Lexington Hotel in Manhattan, surrounded by some of the richest men in America. The stain on my navy blue dress spread slowly. I could smell the garlic and tomato sauce. And the humiliation. A waiter rushed forward nervously with napkins. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he whispered. But the man who caused it wasn't sorry at all. The tall, gray-haired billionaire who had bumped the waiter moments earlier waved his hand lazily. "Relax," he said, slurring slightly. "It's just pasta." Then he looked at me and smirked. "Besides, she probably works here anyway." More laughter exploded around the table. I slowly looked at the man who spoke. Richard Hawthorne. The CEO of TitanCore Technologies. The company that owned half the financial algorithms on Wall Street. A $5 billion empire. He raised his glass casually. "Don't worry," he added mockingly. "Dry cleaning shouldn't be too expensive." Someone else at the table flicked a piece of bread toward my dress. "Hey," another man laughed. "Now she matches the tablecloth." The entire table roared again. For a moment I considered walking away. But instead, I looked directly at Richard Hawthorne. "You should apologize," I said quietly. The laughter stopped. Not because of my words. But because of my tone. Richard stared at me like he had just noticed I could Then he leaned forward slowly. "Apologize," he repeated. The men around him chuckled. "You're standing in the middle of a private investor gala," he said calmly. "And you're telling me what I should do?" I didn't raise my voice. "Yes," I said. The silence lasted 2 seconds. Then Richard burst into laughter again. "Security," he called casually. 2 guards near the entrance immediately started walking toward us. Richard shook his head like he was disappointed. "You know," he said to the table, "this is why you don't let staff wander into executive events." I opened my mouth to respond. But the guards had already reached me. "Ma'am," one of them said politely, "we're going to need you to come with us." I glanced around the room. Hundreds of wealthy investors, CEOs, and executives watched the scene unfold. None of them said a word. One woman at a nearby table shook her head slightly. But she didn't speak either. That's how rooms like this work. Power protects itself. I sighed quietly. "Fine," I said. As the guards escorted me toward the door, Richard Hawthorne lifted his glass again. "To another record-breaking year," he announced. The crowd cheered. But just before I reached the exit, I stopped. I turned around slowly. Richard noticed. "What?" he asked with a grin. I looked him directly in the eyes. "You might regret tonight," I said calmly. A few people chuckled again. Richard smirked. "I seriously doubt that." I held his gaze for another moment. Then I walked out of the ballroom. Outside, the cold Manhattan air hit my face like reality returning. The rain had started while I was inside. Thin droplets fell against the glowing streetlights. I stepped under the awning of the hotel entrance and looked down at my dress. The red stain had spread across the fabric. I let out a small breath. "Of course," I muttered. A taxi driver leaning against his car nearby watched me. "Tough night?" he asked. "You could say that." He pointed toward the hotel. Big rich party in there tonight. I noticed. He chuckled. They ever spill pasta on you before? I laughed softly despite myself. First time. Well, he said, opening his car door, New York's full of surprises. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. The caller ID showed a familiar name. Daniel Ruiz. TitanCore Senior Systems Engineer. I frowned. Why would he be calling me? I answered. Daniel? His voice came through the phone, panicked. Amara, where are you? I just left the Grand Lexington, I said. Why? There was shouting in the background on his end. Computers beeping. People yelling. Then Daniel spoke again. You need to come to TitanCore headquarters right now. I leaned against the wall. What happened? There was a long pause. Then he said 4 words that made my stomach tighten. The system is collapsing. My mind immediately began connecting the dots. TitanCore's AI trading architecture. The same system I built 5 years earlier. The same system the board forced me out of the company for creating. What kind of collapse? I asked slowly. Daniel's voice trembled. The stabilization layer failed. My eyes widened slightly. That's impossible. That's what we thought, he said. But the AI just executed $22 billion in bad trades in the last 6 minutes. My heart skipped. 22 billion. And it's still running. For the first time since leaving the ballroom. I felt something colder than humiliation. Concern. How long before the market notices? I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he whispered something that made the reins suddenly feel heavier. Maybe 40 minutes. I closed my eyes. 40 minutes. If the system kept malfunctioning, TitanCore wouldn't just lose money. It could trigger a market cascade across multiple hedge funds. Which meant billions more could disappear. Amara, Daniel said urgently. You're the only person who understands the core architecture. I looked back at the glowing windows of the hotel ballroom. Inside, the same billionaires who had just laughed at me were celebrating their success. Completely unaware their empire was already starting to crack. I sighed slowly. Daniel, I said. Yes. Did Richard Hawthorne approve the neural governor update? Another pause. How did you know? I rubbed my forehead. Because that change would destabilize the entire algorithm. Well, Daniel said nervously. That's exactly what happened. I looked up at the Manhattan skyline. Send me the system logs, I said quietly. Right now. Are you coming? Daniel asked. I hesitated. For a moment I remembered the laughter in the ballroom. The bread thrown at my dress. Richard Hawthorne calling security. Then I said something Daniel didn't expect. No. Silence filled the phone. What? He asked. I'm not coming. But, Amara, the company is about to lose billions. I stared at the hotel doors. That sounds like Richard Hawthorne's problem. And then I hung up. Inside the Grand Lexington ballroom, the laughter had barely settled when Richard Hawthorne's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen with mild irritation. Another call from TitanCore headquarters. He declined it. Across the table, a venture capitalist raised his glass. Richard, you were saying something about TitanCore doubling profits next quarter. Richard smirked. Gentlemen, TitanCore doesn't just follow the market anymore. He tapped his temple. We predict it. The table laughed. Your AI system is unstoppable, one investor said. That's why we invested. Richard leaned back confidently. It's the most advanced financial algorithm ever built. His phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID read. Emergency systems alert. Richard frowned. Excuse me one moment, he muttered. He stepped away from the table and answered. This better be important. On the other end, a frantic voice responded. Sir, we have a serious problem. Richard rolled his eyes. There's always a problem. Fix it. Sir, the algorithm just triggered $22 billion in failed trades. Richard stopped walking. Excuse me. We can't shut it down. The ballroom music suddenly sounded distant. What do you mean you can't shut it down? Richard snapped. The neural prediction system keeps overriding manual commands. Richard's voice hardened. Then shut down the servers. We tried. And it restarted itself. Richard felt a chill crawl up his spine. Put Daniel Ruiz on the line. A few seconds passed. Then Daniel's voice came through. Richard, we've got a serious architecture failure. Richard lowered his voice. How much have we lost? About 30 billion in assets across partner funds. Richard's face drained of color. 30. And rising. Richard grabbed a chair and sat down heavily. What caused this? Daniel hesitated. The neural governor layer was modified this afternoon. Richard rubbed his temple. Yes, I approve that update. It was supposed to make predictions faster. It removed the stabilization controls, Daniel said. Richard went silent. How long before the market catches on? He asked quietly. Maybe 30 minutes. Richard felt his heartbeat quicken. If the market realized TitanCore's system was unstable, every fund connected to them would panic. That panic would spread. The company's stock would crash. $5 billion in company value could disappear overnight. Fix it, Richard said. We can't. What do you mean you can't? Daniel swallowed. There's only one person who fully understands the architecture. Richard already knew the answer before Daniel said it. Amara Johnson. The name felt like a punch to the stomach. Richard closed his eyes. You're joking. I wish I was. The silence on the phone stretched. Finally Richard spoke. She just left the hotel. Daniel sounded hopeful. Then bring her here. Richard almost laughed. You don't understand. What? Richard stood slowly. She's not exactly in the mood to help. What happened? Richard hesitated. Then he said quietly. We might have insulted her. How badly? Richard glanced back toward the ballroom. Very badly. Daniel groaned. Richard, we are losing millions every minute. I know that. Richard ended the call and hurried back into the ballroom. The celebration was still in full swing. Music. Champagne. Laughter. None of them had any idea their financial empire was seconds away from disaster. Richard clapped loudly. Gentlemen, he said. The room slowly quieted. We have a small situation. A hedge fund manager frowned. What kind of situation? Richard forced a calm smile. A technical issue with the trading algorithm. Someone laughed. That system practically prints money. Richard's voice dropped. It's malfunctioning. The laughter stopped. One board member stood. How bad? Richard took a breath. 30 billion in failed trades. The room erupted with voices. 30 billion. That's impossible. What are the engineers doing? Richard raised his hands. Trying to fix it. And they can't. Silence. Then the CTO spoke carefully. There is someone who might be able to stabilize the system. Richard nodded slowly. Yes. Everyone in the room knew the name already. Amara Johnson. A few people looked confused. But the senior executives exchanged uneasy glances. One board member spoke first. "You mean the engineer who built the core architecture?" "The same one," the CTO said. "Didn't she leave the company years ago?" someone asked. Richard sighed. "She didn't leave." "What do you mean?" Richard looked uncomfortable. "We pushed her out." Another board member frowned. "You forced out the person who built the algorithm controlling billions of dollars?" Richard rubbed his face. "It was complicated." "Where is she now?" Richard hesitated. Then he admitted something that made the entire room go silent. "She was here tonight." A hedge fund manager blinked. "You mean at this event?" Richard nodded. "Yes." Another man leaned forward. "Then where is she?" Richard exhaled slowly. "We had security escort her out." The room exploded. "You what? Are you serious? You kicked out the only person who can fix the system?" Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." The room quieted again. Then he spoke firmly. "We're going to find her." One investor asked the question everyone feared. "What if she refuses?" Richard thought about the pasta stain on her dress. The laughter. The bread thrown at her. Then he said quietly, "She won't refuse." But inside, he wasn't so sure. Outside the hotel, the rain was falling harder now. I was halfway down the block when I heard someone shouting behind me. "Amara." I kept walking. "Amara, wait." I turned slightly. Richard Hawthorne was running toward me in the rain. His expensive suit was already soaked. He stopped a few feet away, breathing heavily. For the first time that night. He didn't look powerful. He looked desperate. "Amara," he said. I crossed my arms. "Yes." He hesitated. Then he said the last thing I ever expected to hear from him. "We need your help." Rain poured harder over the Manhattan streets as Richard Hawthorne stood in front of me, soaked and breathing heavily. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The last time we faced each other had been inside the ballroom. When he was laughing. And I was covered in pasta. Now the situation looked very different. "We need your help," Richard repeated. I studied his face. "You already said that." Behind him, several other executives rushed out of the hotel entrance, clearly searching for him. Or for me. I tilted my head slightly. "How bad is it?" Richard hesitated. "Bad." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not very specific." He wiped rainwater from his forehead. "The AI trading system is malfunctioning." I said nothing. "We've already lost over 30 billion in partner assets," he added quietly. That got my attention. 30 billion. And climbing. I let out a slow breath. "Let me guess," I said calmly. "You modified the neural governor." Richard's eyes widened. "How did you?" "You removed the stabilization layer," I finished. He didn't answer. Which meant I was right. I shook my head slightly. "That governor prevents recursive prediction loops." "We know that now," Richard said quickly. I looked at him. "No. You knew it before." Richard opened his mouth. Then closed it again. More executives had joined him now. The CTO stepped forward nervously. "Amara, the system is spiraling. How long before it crashes the connected hedge funds?" I asked. "Maybe 15 minutes." I glanced back toward the glowing hotel windows. Inside, music still played. Champagne glasses still clinked. But somewhere across the city, trading servers were probably melting down. I turned back to them. "And you want me to fix it?" "Yes," Richard said immediately. I crossed my arms. "Why?" The executives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Richard spoke slowly. Because you're the only one who can. That's not what I asked. What do you mean? I asked why I should help. No one answered. I gestured toward the hotel. 10 minutes ago you called security on me. Richard's jaw tightened. That was a misunderstanding. Was it? One of the investors stepped forward impatiently. Look, we can argue later. No, I interrupted calmly. We can argue now. The rain kept falling. I looked at Richard again. You laughed when they threw food at me. His face flushed slightly. And now you want my help saving your company. Richard finally said what none of them wanted to admit. Yes. For a long moment I said nothing. The only sound was the rain hitting the sidewalk. Finally, I asked one question. How much is TitanCore worth? The CTO answered quietly. 5 billion. And the algorithm? That's most of the value. I nodded slowly. So if it collapses. Richard finished the sentence. The company collapses. I looked directly at him. You built an empire on code you didn't even understand. Richard looked like he wanted to argue. But he couldn't. Because it was true. 5 years ago, when I designed TitanCore's predictive AI architecture, I warned the board about this exact scenario. They ignored me. Then they forced me out of the company. Now the system was breaking exactly the way I predicted. The CTO spoke again urgently. Amara, please, billions of dollars are at stake. I sighed. Billions are always at stake in rooms like yours. Richard stepped closer. Employees depend on TitanCore. That made me pause. How many? Over 3,000. I looked down for a moment. Then back up. You're good at negotiation, Richard. I'm not negotiating. Yes, you are. I pointed toward the street. Because if I walk away right now. No one finished the sentence. They didn't need to. The entire company would collapse. I took a deep breath. All right, I said. Relief flashed across Richard's face. I'll help. The executives immediately relaxed. But then I added 3 words that froze them again. Under conditions. Richard frowned slightly. What conditions? I looked at him calmly. First, I returned to TitanCore as Chief Technology Officer. The executives glanced at each other. Second, I control the entire AI division. Richard hesitated. And third, I said quietly, the company publicly acknowledges I designed the system. The rain continued falling. Richard was silent for several seconds. One board member whispered to him. Richard, we don't have time. Another executive checked his phone. Losses just crossed 40 billion. Richard exhaled slowly. Then he looked at me. Fine. I held out my hand. Then we have a deal. He shook it. And just like that. The balance of power changed. 20 minutes later we were inside TitanCore headquarters. The operations center looked like chaos. Engineers ran between terminals. Screens flashed red warnings. Numbers dropped rapidly. Daniel spotted me immediately. Amara. He rushed across the room. I'm glad you came. I nodded. Show me the system logs. He pulled up the main display. The algorithm was still executing automated trades. Millions of dollars disappearing every few seconds. I studied the screen. Who approved the governor removal? I asked.